I'm sorry. Words do not define my shame.
Sarah Boone made headline news by suffocating her boyfriend to death in a suitcase.
The jury finds the defendant guilty of murder in the second degree.
It started as a game. At least, that's what she said. A quiet apartment. A bottle of wine. A couple who had been through their fair share of fights, their voices often raised louder than their laughter. But tonight was supposed to be different. No shouting. No accusations. Just the two of them. Somewhere in the room, a suitcase sat open. The kind meant for long trips. Sturdy. Spacious. Zippers strong enough to hold everything inside. And then, an idea. A playful challenge, something childish, harmless. Or so it seemed. A man climbed in. The lid closed. The zipper moved. Click. Locked. At first, there was laughter. The kind that comes from too much wine, from letting your guard down for the first time in a long time. Then the laughter faded. Then came the movement, shifting, pushing, the sound of knees knocking against hard fabric. Then the first sign of panic. Sarah. I can't breathe. A muffled voice. Weak at first. Then stronger. Then desperate. The woman standing outside heard him. She was filming, her camera capturing the faint movements inside the suitcase, the way the fabric bulged in small places, the way the zipper remained shut. She didn't unzip it. She didn't call for help. She pressed record. And she laughed. That's what you get. The voice inside the suitcase grew fainter. The movement slowed. The pleas turned into gasps, then silence. The next morning, the suitcase was still there. Unopened. Unmoved. When she finally called 911, her voice was shaky, rushed. She told the dispatcher her boyfriend was dead. She said she had no idea how it happened. She said they had been drinking, playing around. She said she fell asleep. She said a lot of things. But inside her phone, there was a video. And in that video, the truth was waiting. Once investigators pressed play, there was no taking it back. A quiet neighborhood. A storm waiting to break. Winter Park, Florida. February 23, 2020. A peaceful suburban community just outside Orlando. The kind of place where neighbors wave in passing, where the streets are lined with neatly trimmed lawns, and where life moves at a steady, predictable pace. But behind the doors of one particular apartment, something far from ordinary was about to unfold. The couple at the center of it all. The apartment belonged to Sarah Boone, a 42-year-old woman who had spent much of her life chasing dreams that always seemed just out of reach. She had aspirations of being an artist, a creative spirit with an eye for detail. But life had not been kind. Her relationships were tumultuous, her finances strained, and beneath the surface, she carried the weight of personal struggles, ones that had followed her for years. Then, there was Jorge Torres Jr., also 42. A man with a complicated past. His history was marked by ups and downs, with prior arrests linked to domestic disputes. People who knew him described him as someone who could be charming one moment and explosive the next. His relationship with Sarah had been a roller coaster, passionate, but often volatile. Their arguments were loud, their reconciliations swift. They had broken up before. Gotten back together. Fought. Made up. Over and over again. And through it all, alcohol was often a factor. This night would be no different. The hours leading to tragedy. It started like so many nights before. Sarah and Jorge were drinking, unwinding in their apartment. A familiar scene, 2 glasses on the table, a half-empty bottle of wine, the casual hum of conversation that could shift at any moment. There were no signs of tension at first. No indication that anything was wrong. But what happened next would turn an ordinary night into a crime scene. Sarah would later tell police that they were just playing. That it was all part of a game. A silly, drunken challenge between two people who had been together long enough to know each other's limits. But limits were about to be pushed too far. A suitcase sat open on the floor. Jorge climbed inside. Sarah zipped it shut. And in the hours that followed, everything changed. For now, the neighborhood remained undisturbed. No one knew what had happened. No one had heard the cries. No one had seen the fear inside that suitcase. But by morning, that would all change. And once investigators arrived, there would be no denying the truth. Before the police were called. Before the discovery. Before the world saw what had really happened inside that apartment, there was a history. A pattern. A relationship that had been unraveling for years. A toxic love story. Sarah Boone and Jorge Torres Jr. weren't just any couple. Theirs was a relationship marked by chaos, fueled by passion but often turning violent. Their love was turbulent, filled with heated arguments, reconciliations, and, at times, physical fights. The first public sign of trouble came in July 2018. Sarah was arrested for battery by strangulation, accused of attacking Jorge during an argument. The details of that night were hazy, two people intoxicated, tempers flaring, emotions running high. But what mattered was that it wasn't an isolated incident. Jorge had his own share of run-ins with the law. In the months and years that followed, their fights continued. Police were called multiple times. Reports were filed. But each time, they found their way back to each other. It was a cycle: love, conflict, violence, regret, repeat. By February 2020, their relationship was still hanging by a thread. They were still arguing. Still drinking. Still playing with fire. And then came the night that would change everything. The night of the incident. February 23, 2020. Inside their apartment, they drank. Glasses filled. Bottles emptied. The night stretched on, just another evening of alcohol and laughter mixed with underlying tension. Sarah would later tell police that they were playing a game, hide-and-seek. That Jorge willingly climbed into the suitcase as part of their drunken fun. But there were no witnesses. No one to confirm whether he had climbed involuntarily or if something more sinister had happened before the recording started. What is known is this: at some point, Jorge was inside the suitcase, and Sarah was the one who zipped it shut. And she didn't let him out. By the time police arrived at the apartment the next morning, Jorge Torres Jr. was dead. Sarah's explanation was shaky at best. She told the officers she had passed out after locking him in, falling asleep in bed, and waking up the next morning to find him unresponsive. She cried. She appeared distraught. But something wasn't adding up. As investigators combed through the apartment, searching for clues, they seized Sarah's phone. And inside that phone, they found something that would dismantle her entire story. 2 videos. Taken the night before. The first video. The screen is dark. The fabric of the suitcase moves slightly. Inside, Jorge's voice is muffled but clear. Panicked. Struggling. Sarah. I can't breathe. She doesn't unzip the bag. She doesn't panic. She laughs. That's what you get for everything you've done to me. Jorge keeps pleading. His words are strained, suffocated. His last breaths caught on camera. The second video. A different angle. The suitcase barely moving now. His voice weaker, fading. Sarah, seriously. Again, she refuses to help. She mocks him. She tells him he deserves this. Then, silence. The video ends. With this evidence, Sarah Boone's story falls apart. She hadn't been asleep. She hadn't forgotten. She had watched him die. The world would soon see the truth. And there would be no going back. The moment the videos were discovered, the case took a turn. Sarah Boone was no longer just a grieving girlfriend who had made a terrible mistake, she was the prime suspect in a homicide. The body cam footage captured her initial interactions with the police. At first, she played the role of a heartbroken woman in shock. She repeated the same story, it was an accident, she never meant to hurt him, they were just playing. But investigators weren't buying it. They had seen the videos. They had heard her voice, mocking, taunting, refusing to let him out. And then there was the suitcase itself. Jorge Torres Jr.'s official autopsy report painted a chilling picture of his final moments. His cause of death, positional asphyxia, meaning he suffocated, trapped inside the suitcase, unable to expand his chest enough to breathe. But that wasn't all. The medical examiner found multiple injuries on Jorge's body. Bruises on his shoulders, forehead, and back. A cut near his lip. Signs of blunt force trauma. These wounds weren't consistent with simply being inside a suitcase. They suggested a struggle, impact, force. Had Jorge been beaten before being locked inside? Had Sarah kicked or thrown the suitcase while he was trapped? Investigators now had both physical evidence and digital proof that Sarah Boone was lying. On February 25, 2020, just 2 days after Jorge's death, the Orange County Sheriff's Office officially charged Sarah Boone with second-degree murder. The handcuffs clicked around her wrists. She was booked into the Orange County Jail. Her mugshot circulated the news, a pale face, eyes wide, staring blankly into the camera. The woman who had laughed at Jorge's cries just 2 nights earlier now faced the possibility of life in prison. But her legal battle was only just beginning. Seated in the interrogation room, Sarah Boone stuck to her story. They had been playing a game. She fell asleep and forgot. She never meant to hurt him. But detectives weren't interested in her excuses. One of them slid a phone across the table. Her phone. And then, they pressed play. Sarah watched as her own voice filled the room. Her own laughter. Her own words, taunting Jorge as he begged for air. The color drained from her face. She had no explanation. The evidence spoke louder than any excuse she could muster. As news of Sarah Boone's arrest spread, Jorge Torres Jr.'s family was left grappling with the reality of his death. They had known about his troubled relationship with Sarah. They had seen the fights, heard the arguments. But they never imagined this would be how it ended. In interviews, his loved ones described Jorge as a man who had his struggles but didn't deserve to die this way. His sister, overcome with emotion, pleaded for justice. She watched him suffer. She recorded his last moments. How can she say this was just a game? Their grief fueled the prosecution's case. This wasn't an accident. This was murder. And now, Sarah Boone would have to answer for what she had done. The trial would be next. And the world would finally hear the full truth. The trial of Sarah Boone was anything but straightforward. From the outset, it was marked by a series of complications that would delay proceedings and raise eyebrows. Boone's relationship with her legal counsel was tumultuous. Over the course of the pre-trial phase, 8 different attorneys withdrew from her case, citing various reasons. This led Judge Michael Cranick to rule that Boone had forfeited her right to court-appointed counsel, a decision that underscored the challenges within her defense team. In a bold move, Boone chose to represent herself temporarily. During this period, she penned a 58-page handwritten letter to Judge Cranick, accusing him of bias and detailing her grievances. The letter, filled with emotional appeals and personal reflections, painted a picture of a defendant grappling with the weight of her circumstances. Eventually, Boone secured representation from attorney James Owens. Discussions of a plea deal emerged, with prosecutors offering a manslaughter charge in exchange for a 15-year sentence. Boone, maintaining her innocence, rejected the offer, opting to face trial. The trial commenced on October 14, 2024, after multiple delays, including one due to Hurricane Milton. The prosecution presented a compelling case, highlighting the harrowing videos where Boone taunted Torres as he pleaded for help from within the suitcase. The defense countered with claims of battered spouse syndrome, suggesting Boone's actions were a response to prolonged abuse. After deliberating for less than 2 hours on October 25, 2024, the jury returned a guilty verdict for second-degree murder. The swift decision reflected the jury's alignment with the prosecution's narrative and the weight of the evidence presented. On December 2, 2024, Boone faced sentencing. The courtroom was thick with emotion as the judge handed down a life sentence without the possibility of parole, ensuring Boone would spend the remainder of her days behind bars. The trial's conclusion did little to mend the shattered hearts of Jorge Torres Jr.'s family. In the courtroom, his mother and sister delivered emotional victim impact statements, their voices trembling as they recounted the profound loss and enduring pain Boone's actions had inflicted upon them. Their words painted a vivid picture of a family forever altered, grappling with grief and seeking justice for their beloved Jorge. The saga of Sarah Boone and Jorge Torres Jr. serves as a haunting reminder of how volatile relationships can culminate in unimaginable tragedy. The trial's resolution brought legal closure, but the emotional scars borne by the families involved remain deep and enduring. As we reflect on this harrowing case, we invite you to share your thoughts. Do you believe justice was served in the sentencing of Sarah Boone? What are your perspectives on the defense's argument of battered spouse syndrome in this context? Engage with us in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more in-depth true crime stories. Like this video if it resonated with you, and share to spread awareness. Your insights and discussions help shed light on these complex narratives.